Hello everyone and welcome back to Bitwig Studio and Music Production. This is lesson 2.22 and our main focus in this lesson is figuring out the best way to control the volume faders on our various decks. So I wanted to start by showing you what happens if I insert a new audio track or a new instrument track or a new effect track. By default, you see that our fader is down, and in my preferences, and I think by default, it's set that any new track you bring in is going to go to minus 10 dB. And this is very, very helpful. You can see it there when you're actually creating, because if you're bringing in samples from outside, chances are those samples have been mastered to be as loud as possible. It's one of the things that's going to draw you to buying a particular sample pack. If you hear one sample pack as being louder than another, you're probably going to like that one more, and so you'd be more likely to buy it. That's all well and good, but if you're working in a track and you have all the faders down like you should, so you're not clipping at all, you then bring that in, it's like, whoa, like way too much energy, way too much sound, and so you have to get in there and start tinkering and bring it down really, really quick so you don't blow your ears out. But Bitwig has decided to, by default, allow you to bring a fader in at minus 10. I think that's great. But when we're DJing, we don't really want to do that. When we're DJing, we want it to be pretty loud. We want it to be about what we got from that full track. So for example, this track was obviously mixed and mastered, and it's been mixed and mastered quite loud, as you can see. You see how high our peaks are. We've talked about this in other videos. And let's just check something out real quick. So if I go to our master channel and I turn off the limiter, and I play this back at 0 dB. Let's double click to go to 0. And I click play. You can see we're going into the reds, and that is the one thing we want to avoid. You can even hear some of that digital distortion, and it's not a pleasant sound. So you're asking, well, how is it going red inside of Bitwig? But if I play this back on a different device, I have no problems. I can hear it and I'm not getting that clipping. Well, my guess is this track was, probably mixed and mastered in Pro Tools or in Logic or in a different application. And in that application, the meters just weren't as sensitive as they are in Bitwig. Bitwig seems to have very, very sensitive meters, and pretty much everything I've brought in that's commercial loudness has distorted on me. So what we have to do is we need to make sure we can stop that distortion from the source, but not turn it down so much that we're having to really turn up whatever our output device is. So if you have just a couple speakers, you don't want to have to crank those all the way to 11. And we've talked about how loudness really works on an exponential curve. So just 2 or 3 dB here or there can really have the impact of multiplying it by 2, in terms of actual perceived loudness. But I want to avoid that clipping. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to command click here, which will let me type in my own value. And I'm going to select, let's try minus 3. And now I'm going to play this back. My limiter is off again. And if I select the inspector panel when I'm on my channel, I can see my meter right here. And right now we're peaking out at around minus 1.8 dB. I'd probably want a little more space than that. And the reason is if we are doing effects and we're going to be doing some layering stuff a little bit, we're going to end up going more than that. So I'm going to try to get to around minus 3. So maybe if I go here, command click and select minus 5, we could play it back. We can reset the meter here by just clicking. And minus 3.8 is going to be good enough for me. So I'm not going to go in and try to dial it in any closer. And again, we'd probably go into this deck and command click and do the same exact thing, minus 5. Now, normally you would think that the best spot to control your volume is going to be with our actual faders right here. But there is a problem with that, and I'm going to show you what that problem is. So if I have my MIDI controller here next to me and I say learn controller assignment, I turn on these faders, notice that it doesn't stop at minus 5. It just keeps going. Not only that, but we have no visual display to tell us where we're at. We can kind of see it if we're looking here on the left, but chances are you may not have the inspector panel open when you're working, and so you have no idea. You're kind of just shooting in the dark, and you don't want to go over that minus 5. even if you have the limiter, because we don't want to lose any of the original content from our tracks. And once we start limiting it, we are losing something, which people for some reason don't seem to understand, that is what happens when you limit. So what are we going to have to do? Well, obviously we can't control the volume here. I'll clear the controller assignment, command click, bring this back to our -5. And we're going to control the volume using one of Bitwig's containers. Now, these containers, without going into too much detail, are what set Bitwig apart from any other software I've ever worked with. These are insanely powerful. And when you start working in this program, you're going to realize it doesn't take too long to learn all of the effects and the instruments, but these containers are limitless in possibility. I'm going to use an FX layer. An FX layer works like this. You can have multiple series of effects working in parallel. So normally if we have effects, if we have like a, I don't know, we'll go, and then we'll put on our EQ DJ. So right now the signal flow is working like this. I'm playing my track here. It's going into this distortion unit, followed by this ladder filter unit, followed by our EQ DJ. You can see we've actually added gain and we're going over, probably because of this resonance. Now that's really, really cool. However, this is all dependent on the order that we place these across. So if I were to change this and move my distortion to the end, you can hear what a huge difference that makes. Right? Now, when you're using an effects layer, what you have is the ability to control everything in a parallel series. So each time you have a new layer, you're building a new chain of serial effects. So you're building a new chain of effects that you can then place horizontally. So if I click play right now, we're actually not going to hear anything because we don't have any layers in here at all. So I'll just click plus here and I'm going to put on anything. It doesn't really matter. And just like that, we get signal. Now the interesting thing is I don't even need to have this EQ2 here. All I need is this. All I need is a layer. So if I'm playing back, I can even just delete this. And now let's listen to the difference in perceived loudness when I turn this off and on. So it's exactly the same, and that's phenomenal. That's what we want. We are still going here, here, and then here, so it would probably help to turn down the volume of our clip from the source, but for right now, let's not worry about that too much. This is set to 0 dB, and that's great. I mean, maybe the way you might want to do this is set this to -5 and then set this to 0, but for our example, we're going to leave it as we leave it. But do be aware that we are going from here through here and then to our fader. Our fader is the very last line of defense before we go out to the master. So the brilliant thing about this is I can actually open this up, and now I can set macro controls. And macro controls are amazing because macro controls allow you to manipulate any parameter that you see that's turned this like blue color. So what we want to control is our loudness level here. So I'm just going to turn this to 0 right now. I'm going to click the map button, and I'm going to pull this out to exactly 1. And 1, I believe, is going to be that 0 dB mark. So we can check it, but for right now, just set it to 1. Click this off, and you'll see we have no gain coming through. So if I click play, nothing. But if I turn this and bring it all the way up, boom. And how am I going to check to see that this is at the 0 dB mark? It's going to get a little bit loud, so I'm going to turn on my limiter. And now I'm just going to pull this all the way up. So I could actually mute it and see. Well, let's just let you hear what it sounds like if you don't do that. So if I double click, it sets me back to 0, and that looks pretty much right where we're at. Let's pull this back. So obviously that is the 0 dB mark. I'm sorry if I didn't explain that very well, but you can see what we've got. So now what I can do is I could learn the controller assignment, and I'll use that same first knob. And now if I bring it up all the way, we're limited. We're not going all the way up. So if I play back my track, I want to fade this in slowly. We are in business, folks. Now let me talk about the biggest issue I have with Bitwig right now. The issue is that you can't map multiple assignments to one knob or fader. So I can't, for example, control this knob with the exact same fader as with this knob. So I'll show you what I mean. So if I click Learn Controller Assignment and I turn that same knob, now suddenly I've lost the ability to manipulate and turn this knob. Why is this a big issue? Well, it's a big issue for us because a lot of people are looking for crossfader control inside of Bitwig. Now, Bitwig doesn't come with a crossfader. There's no ability for me to, turn one up and turn one down simultaneously. And initially I thought, okay, no big deal. I can just make my own. But the fact that we can't send the same fader to two different parameters in the software means I'm not going to be able to create a crossfader. But if Bitwig ever does allow for that to happen, here is how you would create a crossfader. So I'm just going to copy this effects layer, delete this DJ for right now, paste it in. All right. And you can see that I'm turning the fader and I'm not getting any result. But if I wanted to create a crossfader, what I would do is I would clear this, set this up to 0 again. Now I'd map, and I would just map this the opposite way. All right, unmap it, set it to my controller assignment. And now as I pull it up, this is coming down. And on my other track, assuming I could do this, as I pull it up, it would actually be going up. The volume would be going up. All right, so that is going to be the way that you'll be able to create a basic crossfader inside of Bitwig Studio, assuming they allow for you to eventually map multiple parameters inside the software to one fader. So that's all I want to cover in this lesson. In the next lesson, we're going to talk about adding on to this effects layer and how we want to be set up getting ready for our live set. Thank you for watching, and you'll hear from me again in the next lesson.